Hello everyone, I'm Hayden, and in this video I'll be talking about what you should be expecting at UBC Sauder, as well as I will give you some tips on how to succeed here. We'll be talking about a lot of topics such as workload here, the grades, the people culture, as well as the class culture. So if that sounds interesting to you, be sure to stick around all the way until the end. Let's start off with how is the workload at UBC Sauder? Well, I would say for me it is manageable, but it is certainly you have to actually put in the effort. And one very important thing about managing workload is to figure out what are things that you actually have to do and what are things that you can actually just kind of skim or only do 30-40% and still get away with it. So for example, for my COM 192 course, that is the OBHR course by the way, for that course there are pre-readings that you need to do before each class. And when I say pre-reading, I'm saying around 10,000 words. And there's 2 classes per week. So that means you're reading 20,000 words. And if you're trying to take notes, for me, every week I would be spending 4 hours if I try to do that actually, right? So I did that for the first 2 classes, and then I realized that was a terrible plan because that is very unsustainable for the long term. And instead, what you should be doing is just skimming. For example, for that course, the professor actually had all of the key points of the topic actually just on the slides. So realistically, you don't really need to take notes because he just posts the slides. So that's already a big time saver there. You don't really need to take notes when you're actually reading the pre-reading. But reading 10,000 words is still a lot of work. The first thing you can do is just read the chapter summary at the very end. There usually is a chapter summary that you can read. And if you find anything confusing in the chapter summary, then you can try and go back and find the section that actually talks about that one specific point, instead of you having to read all of the sections in that one chapter. Another way you can make the pre-reading a lot more manageable is by simply throwing the entire reading or maybe portions of the reading into ChatGPT or any other generative AI and just have them summarize it for you. You're still getting the content, so you're not necessarily missing out on anything. I feel like this is a very efficient way of doing readings, and that has been how I've been doing it ever since my second semester. Now, regarding assignments, I feel like a lot of people go into business school expecting a lot of group assignments. I feel like that's true to a certain extent. There's definitely more group projects compared to other majors, but also at the same time, it's not necessarily that every single assignment is a group assignment. I would say for assignments, it's roughly 50-50 for first years, 50% individual assignments, 50% group assignments. And for most of those group assignments, you're already assigned a group, so you don't really get to choose your group mates, unfortunately. So related to assignments, let's talk about grades at Sauder. So let's start off with the facts, okay? Admission average into Sauder is 95%. That means that the people that got into Sauder, when they were in high school, on average, they got 95%. So what is the average at Sauder? Well, it is 73%. Clearly, that's a pretty big drop. And as you can see with the numbers, on average, people drop over 20% on their average. So that's definitely something you want to be keeping in mind when you look at your grades in first year or in university in general. You really can't be expecting those 90s or even high 80 marks anymore. And just to give you a little perspective on the grade distribution at Sauder, in first year, one of my friends got around an 87 average and he was ranked 6th in Sauder. So you can see that practically no one gets into the 90s. You really shouldn't be aiming for that, especially in qualitative courses. So for example, the courses that require you to write essays, those you practically could never aim for 90%, or else that's just going to really significantly damage your mental health. For my first assignment in university, I actually got a 62.5%. And I remember that very vividly because I even got so annoyed and so frustrated that I made a whole ass Instagram story about it because I was so frustrated. But at the end of the day, I still got a high 70 for that course. And in my first year, I actually got a higher than 80% average. So I would definitely say don't get bogged down by 1 or 2 assignments where you don't do well. It's just 1 or 2 assignments, guys. You can definitely bounce back from that. And even if it is a midterm or a final, that's just one course, right? You still have so many courses. So don't get too stressed out about that. As long as you pass the course, then you're fine. You can keep going and you can pull back some marks in later courses. The next topic I want to talk about is the co-op program. So in case you don't know, the co-op program is basically a program that Sauder and many other faculties actually offers you that allows you as the student to actually take a term off from studying and actually go and work at an internship position. And this program is especially important for international students that also want to get that work experience, because international students with just their student visa, you are actually not allowed to do any work. And so if you want that work experience, you really do need that co-op program. Now the co-op program for Sauder is mainly available for second and third year students. The opening for that, application opening for that opens in around September. So if you're just a first year student, you're just coming into Sauder, really it is a later problem for you. You don't really need to worry about that. All you really need to worry about is the grades that this program requires. Now, it's not necessarily like, super high of an average that they require. It is just around the Sauder average. I believe it is 70 to 73% in order to get into the program. As well, you also need to do an interview for that program. But again, the interview is pretty routine. It is not necessarily very hard, so don't get too stressed about it. I don't think I've actually heard of anyone that got rejected at the interview stage for the co-op program. So as long as your grades are decent and then you apply, you should be good. Now quickly, I do want to talk about the pros and cons of the co-op program. The pros are very clear, right? You firstly, especially for international students, you actually get the opportunity to do work experience. In addition to that, you also get access to the co-op job portal, which allows you to get access to a lot of internship positions, some of which are only available to co-op students. And also from the company's perspective, I believe when they hire co-op students, they actually do get a subsidy. So from their perspective, they're also more likely to hire co-op students compared to just a normal student. However, having said that, there's also some cons to the co-op program, mainly the fact that you do have to pay to be in the co-op program. So again, it's not necessarily that it's very, very expensive. If you're already in the Sauder program, this is just basically the same price as a normal Sauder course. But if you, for example, if you want to do 3 work terms, then you'll be needing to pay the same price as 3 normal Sauder courses. So think of that what you will. It is definitely not exactly cheap. So if you want to do 3 work terms, which is the normal work term amount for the co-op program, that's nearly $3,000, which is definitely not cheap, but depending on who you are, that is definitely very worth it or very not worth it. So definitely do your own calculations to decide whether or not the co-op program is for you. So next up, I want to talk about the people culture at Sauder. I know that Sauder has the very notorious reputation of being Sauder snakes, right? People are kind of backstabbing each other and the people culture in general is pretty bad. Honestly, personally, from my personal experience, I haven't really experienced that before. Now, just to give you a little reference point, I'm already done second year, so I still have 2 years to go, obviously, and maybe the Sauder snakes come out in third year. I don't know, maybe that's true, but from my personal experience, people are pretty genuine, and if you ask for help, people do generally help you. And so I don't really see the snaky parts, although, to be fair, I have heard stories, but it is not exactly the people that I've interacted with. So just from the sample size that I have heard of, I feel like it is definitely there, but also realistically, every department has their bad apples or their bad snakes. So I feel like it's not necessarily a big problem at UBC Sauder. Now, another big point for students coming in from high school into university is the class sizes. So if you have watched any movies, you might have seen the giant lecture halls and with like 100 people in classes. So you may be wondering if that is the case at Sauder as well. Well, I would like to tell you that unfortunately it depends. Really, it truly depends on what class it is. For example, for my COM 196 course, for the business communication courses, it is actually just 30 people. So that's basically just roughly the same size as, just a normal high school class. And then it varies significantly from class to class, right? So for those, as well as for the tutorials and discussions, it is all roughly 30 people. But there are other courses such as COM 196 the OBHR course that has 60 people, which doubles the amount at a normal high school class, and even higher for courses such as Com 101, Business Fundamentals. That course has over 100 students in just one lecture hall. And so just from these examples, I'm sure you can notice that class sizes definitely vary. Now, linked below is a website that actually has all of the classrooms that Sauder provides. Now, I would say for Sauder courses, 90% of the courses are in the Sauder building, which is good in the sense that, firstly, you don't need to move around too much. For some other majors, they have to jump around the whole campus, which is so much walking, and I just feel so bad for them. But for business students, you really don't have that too much. The only thing you really do have to walk around for is the math course, Math 100, which is usually hosted in IRC, which is like a 10-minute walk. But other than that, every other course, for me at least, was in Sauder. So you can definitely check out that website that I have linked below for all of the Sauder classrooms, and you can see all the way from the really small ones that host only 30 people, all the way to the highest ones that host over 100 people. So just to take a look at those screenshots and, be prepared. And related to that, I will also highly recommend you to make sure you know where your classroom is before your first class. I have met a lot of people that were late for their first class because they just couldn't find their classroom. That's a big L. Don't be the one that's holding that L, okay? Like, especially for your first class in your first year in university, you would already be pretty nervous about it. So don't be adding more stressors for yourself. Just figure out where your classroom is before your first day, okay? During Imagine Day, right? Imagine Day is the first day of school, but there isn't actually any classes. You just get to walk around campus and look at booths for the clubs and stuff. And like during that day, just take a little time and just go into the Sauder building and just find all of your classes, guys. Like that will actually save you so much hassle of trying to find and like rush to find your class on the first day of classes. So just, highly recommend you to do that before your first class. Another commonly asked question is, can you skip classes in university? Well, again, it depends on the course. For most Sauder first year courses, you cannot skip. For example, for Com 101, 20% of the course is marked by attendance, participation marks, and in-class assignments. So unless you want to sacrifice 20% of your mark just to skip class and sleep in, which like why? just why? You're paying for the course. Might as well attend the course, right? For most of these Sauder courses, like Com 101, Com 196, Com 105, these courses all have attendance marks and participation marks. So unless you want to sacrifice a lot of marks, you can't really skip courses. Now, having said that though, for some of the elective courses, you can. Whether or not you should remains to be a topic for discussion. So for example, for the Math 100 lectures, there's no participation marks, there's no attendance marks. So realistically, you could skip all the lectures. They even have, for my year at least, they even had lecture recordings where you can just look back at the recordings later if you really want to. So for those courses, can you skip lectures? Yes, but if you want to keep track on the course, you probably do have to put in significant hours just to, do the practice, read through the slides, or just, watch the lectures at 2 times speed. Whatever floats your boat, you have to do those additional work just to compensate for not going to lecture in order to stay on task and stay on topic, right? So is that a good deal for you? You definitely have to, do some mental calculations and experiment by yourself to figure out whether or not that is a good deal for you. And so for me, I would actually just skip all the lectures and on my off times, actually just look through the slides and read through it very slowly to actually understand the concepts, and then do all the practices that you're given to actually further solidify those knowledge. So that worked for me. I know some people can do a lot more efficiently and do a lot less work and still get the same result. I know that some people have to do a lot more work than that and in order to get the same result. So especially for courses like math, it definitely depends on who you are and what your skill level is, what your learning style is. So definitely experiment and figure out what you want. Now finally, I would like to talk about the lids down policy. So basically for Sauder first year courses, they really emphasize the lids down policy, where they basically, a lot of the professors do not want you to have your laptops open. Hence they want the laptop lids to be down. So that, hence the name lids down policy. And so they only allow it for certain activities or discussions where they would say, okay, now take out your laptops and do this. And then once the activity is done, they will say, okay, now please put down your lids and then we can start, continue our course, stuff like that. And so I would highly recommend you to actually have a tablet for note taking. And so that's how most students at Sauder take notes. They usually have, like a tablet. Usually, like a lot of people use iPad, which 100% definitely works. But if you find that iPad is too pricey for you, which it is definitely pricey, let's all be honest, it's very pricey. If it's too pricey for you, you can also just buy some random Android tablets as well. As long as you have a writing utensil for it, and so you can write on the tablet, it works, right? You don't need the most fancy technology for this. But yeah, so the lids down policy, they really just don't want anything standing up. So as long as your tablet or iPad is flat on the table, then they say it's fine. And that's basically all the tips that I have for you today. And here are some more UBC related videos that I think you might enjoy. So if you enjoyed this one, you watched all the way till the end, so I'm sure you found it pretty useful. So be sure to go check those ones out. Thank you for watching all the way until the end, and I'll see you over there.